How would you grade Oregon's season this past year? I'm giving them an A minus. My expectations were extremely high for this team. So you got to understand now, when you enter the rarefied air that Dan Lanning has Oregon in, to get an A plus, you got to win the national title. I mean, any little misstep, and we're going to dock you. That's only because our expectations are sky high. I mean, if Tulane had this season, it's an A plus. So I'm going to give them an A minus. They, in Dan Lanning's 3 seasons, have gone 10 wins, 12 wins, 13 wins. Contrary to what we've seen in LA, that's called progression, not regression. Now, the starting points were different, but Dan Lanning and his staff have built on what they inherited and built on how they started there. They were a victim of the playoff format this year, too. As much as your lasting impression is of them getting blown out by Ohio State, if I did nothing more than change the draw, theoretically they still would have gone on to lose to Ohio State, but they sure wouldn't have gotten blown out in round 1 or the first game they played. So I think in a little way they were a victim because someone had to play Ohio State. It just so happens it ends up being them. Key takeaway for me when it comes to Oregon, no one even remembers that within the past 2 seasons, they've lost a head coach caliber offensive coordinator and a first-round draft pick at quarterback. That should tear you apart. Like, that should bring you back down to earth, where at the very least you got to rebuild a little bit. Kenny Dillingham left there as the OC and was a good enough head coach to take Arizona State from trash heap to playoff. That's the caliber of coordinator Lanning lost, and he just seamlessly backfilled it. That stuff's not easy to do. And he did it with a guy you had never heard of. You'd never heard of Will Stein, in all likelihood, before Dan Lanning found him and brought him to Eugene. And it's like, they just click on. And then Bo Nix fulfills the potential that some of us saw in him all the way out of high school in Alabama. He goes and gets drafted in the first round, and Dylan Gabriel, just come on down. And if you don't work out, we'll have Dante Moore. That stuff's not easy. Dan Lanning, you look at his career progression at Oregon, and he just keeps climbing up the ladder. 10 wins, 12 wins, 13 wins. Baked into that, they lost a head coach caliber offensive coordinator and a first-round draft pick at quarterback. That's getting it done, and that's not going anywhere anytime soon. That's not stopping. That's a really big deal. Recruiting's legit. Portal's legit. That roster this upcoming year, they've improved that thing. So that's legit. We can talk about that later, though. The nitpick I would have is the same one anyone would have. The Rose Bowl blowout. They got outcoached. They got embarrassed. They got pantsed. They got humbled. Now, that'll be used, knowing that program like I do. That'll be used. That won't be wasted. But it made some of the season feel wasted in just a fan's eyes, because you build up and you build up and you build up. You're the number 1 team in the country. You win the Big Ten. Our first year in the league, we're the number 1 seed, and just, felt like those Braves playoff years back in the early 2000s. I watch all 162 games. They've locked up the 1 seed. Doesn't even matter what you do it against the Mets and the Phillies in September. And then you get to October and some hot wild card team just buzzsaws you in the first round. Like, we won 101 games for this? It's kind of like how an Oregon fan felt. We won all these games for this? At least we're in Pasadena. At least it's warm. But, man, it wasn't a brutal schedule this year. They still took care of business, but it wasn't the most brutal schedule in the world. Defense allowed more explosive plays than I would like. And when they got to the end, Penn State put 37 on them. Ohio State puts 41, probably could have been 50 if they needed it. So those are little nitpicks, but by and large, A-minus season. Phenomenal season for Oregon, still trending up. I think that they are a team that if you really dive into what's happened to that roster since the end of their season, not many teams that went that deep in the postseason have gotten better. I think Oregon's gotten better. So that's 2025 stuff. But I'd give them an A-minus. Good reward for Dan Lanning, and still enough of a, hey, you suck, you didn't get the job done, to where he loses a little sleep tonight. If we can do nothing more than cost Dan Lanning some sleep tonight, we will have done our job.